Hey folks, excuse the bearded look. I have just popped into the office quickly to get something for the kids, and I thought I'd drop a quick message out to all of you who are property investors and maybe new to property or have been in the market a while and just looking at your strategies at the moment. So I'm just going to adjust this a little bit, hopefully you can see my face okay. So look, the market has changed on the financial side with regards to the banks. Valuers have been a bit more cautious, as you're probably aware. I think we are knocking on the door of an up-and-coming recession. Well, we're actually kind of in it. We have been for a little bit, looming and knocking on the door with it. And I've talked about this now for about 18 months. Watch out for it, watch out for it. The timing has sort of been leading up. COVID's nudged that now. And actually, I've created a webinar, which if you haven't seen it, I think we might be launching it. I created it about 4, 5, 6 months ago, and then we've updated it. So it's something that may become available to some of you. Anyway, that's a separate thing altogether. Point being that there's always opportunities in the market, and although yes, there's been certain areas of the property market that may have got stuck a little bit, haven't moved as well as people wanted to, tenancies changing, there's new policy coming in, even with the eviction process for tenants, and that's something you have to be aware of and stay ahead of. What is really, I think, a sign of the times, and I saw this back in 2008, 2009 as we came through that last recession, is the massive demand, and I mean massive demand for government housing, to the extent that in reality we don't have enough properties to provide housing for people in this country, period. If you then zone that off into different groups of people, and you look at something like social housing, for example, the government is crying out. You're looking at probably 1.5 million plus people that are on housing waiting lists, and some of those areas have waiting lists of 10, 15, 20 years or so. And if you think I'm joking, go and check it out for yourself. So, you know, this is an opportunity for us to help the government provide housing for people. So to give you some context, one of the properties that we have that rents out for about £75 to £80 per room per week, that property is a 5-bedroom HMO. So that would yield, I don't know, £1,900 a month, something like that, gross rent. The council have approached us. Well, actually, a good member of our team has done some research and made phone calls and then let them know where we're at. And they've come back and said, actually, we would like to take this property off you for about £480 per month versus, say, £350, £325, maybe £375. And that's per room per month. So all of a sudden, you've got 480 times 5 rooms versus 300, 350 times 5 rooms. And they're desperate. And they said, under the circumstances due to COVID, the pressure's been building up. It was already there, but now it's been accentuated. And this has been happening now over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks. We've always had a policy of looking out. And I have somebody that's in my team. Some of you know her, Nikki. She's amazing. She does a lot of great work and getting in and talking to councils, etc., and establishing what they're looking for and putting our credentials forward. And there's a whole process to do that. And if you get enough influence, then you get opportunities. So my point being that this is without a doubt happening all around the country. You've got a growing social housing list. You've got a situation that's been compounded by COVID-19. So more people desperately needing a home. We want to provide a home. If you're socially conscious as a person, of course you want to do that. If you then, sorry, I just got a phone call coming in then. If you then look outside of that and you say, well, what other areas are there to consider? You now could start to look at charities and local non-for-profit organisations, which is another area that we focus. Those groups of people are also in huge demand. What I mean by huge demand is those people are looking and they have a huge demand for these type of properties. So it can be anything from war veterans to vulnerable tenants. And the main concern at the moment is that whilst those charities are looking for houses, they're also looking for specific types of houses in specific areas. So their concern is they can't find them, and they're looking for landlords, private landlords that have a social awareness, socially conscious, and are prepared to bring those properties to them. Now, whether it's the council, whether it's a charity, asylum seekers is another one. So this is where you get a guaranteed rent. And by the way, with these schemes, you're normally given a guaranteed rent, anything from a year to 5 years. We secure tenancy agreements out to 7 and 10. We're actually looking at a few at the moment and just running some numbers on that. those type of strategies enable you to get a guaranteed rent for a longer period of time, and that period of time will depend on who you're working with. So with the non-for-profit organisations that I tend to deal with, they are normally 3 years up to 5 years, typically 3 to start with, whereas councils will come in at maybe 3 to 5. Then you've got the asylum seeker type strategy, which can be 5, 7 years, 10 years. In fact, there's new contracts coming out which is 7 with a 3-year extension. And these are HMOs and family lets as well. So you have the option to take your buy-to-let and hand it over to an organisation as a buy-to-let, or you have the opportunity to take the property and then have each room let out. Now, there's obviously several caveats to what I'm saying to you now, and that is, number one, you've got to decide, is your property licensed? Is it already a licensed HMO, or can it be licensed as a HMO if you're doing that? And you might move from a buy-to-let to a social housing HMO strategy, or from a buy-to-let to an asylum seeker HMO strategy. So all the rules still apply, but my point is, what might be a £500 a month rent property could suddenly become a £1,200-1,500 a month rent property, because you've changed that strategy. And there will be, and I put my hand up and say, guarantee it's going to be the situation, a growing demand for this over the coming next, I think, 12 to 24, 18, 24 months as a minimum. And really, so the opportunity is there if you're looking. So if you're watching this and you've got a portfolio of maybe buy-to-lets and you think, how can I increase my income? That would be one of the first things I would look at if I were you, is to go and actually take a look at where your area is. Is there opportunities to go to council, go to these organisations, non-for-profit, asylum seeker type organisations that deal with asylum seekers, and say, right, these are the properties I've got. And they'll usually give you an indication of what they're looking for. They'll give them a postcode check and then maybe pass it off and say, yes, then you've got to go through the process of going to convert it to HMO, going through that formal process as well. But that's a totally different thing altogether, which you need to get education on, of course. So that's my heads up on that. If you weren't aware of it, and if you are aware of it, I would certainly take advantage of it, because I think if you're looking for something that's a little bit more hands-off, and by the way, people say to me, well, what about social housing tenants? Aren't they, they're not as good as a professional couple. Well, I mean, that all comes down to you as a person and how you measure people. Human beings are human beings. I mean, look at all the debate that's going on at the moment, which is outrageous. In what's been happening in the States, it's very scary to see how something like this has escalated to a point where it should have been addressed years and years ago. I grew up in a period where, I won't go into it, but I mean, we used to see it, but not on such a big scale. So I think there are a lot of people out there who are either vulnerable or in situations where financially they're not in a position to be able to afford to rent their own property. And so when people say to me, oh, well, social housing tenants aren't the best quality tenants, my answer to that is, well, first of all, they're human beings. They need a home. They need a place to live. Their circumstances are such that they're not able to maybe work, or they're just not in a position to rent their own property privately. And as landlords, I think we have a social responsibility to be able to provide housing to people that are in a difficult place. I know when I was a student and when I was going through my early years, I was grateful that there were people out there renting so I could get a room. And I lived in the Yorkshire area, so some of my landlords were Asian landlords, and then I had English landlords. We had a whole range of different landlords at the time, but they all provided us with a home, so I was grateful for that. Had they said, you're a student, you don't have a lot of income, you're lower class, whatever, we don't want to rent to you, I'd have not been able to find somewhere to live. So I think it's important as a human being to take respect for those people we want to put into our properties. The main thing is to be aware that these will be in properties that aren't necessarily the most luscious in green and upmarket areas. So you'll tend to find that social housing markets, the council have areas for regeneration, and they like those areas to be regenerated and for social housing tenants to be there, because they're typically lower cost properties and the rental figures will be lower, and so it's more affordable for the council to place people there. And that's typically how it works. But we've had over the years some fantastic social housing tenants and asylum seeker tenants who've looked after the property really well. So I think it's important to take a bigger view on this. And I think if you have an opportunity to help others and in the same time help yourself and become financially secure, what a great way to do business. So go look into this if you haven't been thinking about it. I think it's a great strategy to seek, and particularly you're going to see more of this in the coming months. So social housing and the long-term guaranteed strategies and the asylum seekers and the charitable organisations. It's Dr. Rose signing out. Have a great evening. It's good to see Dom there. Dom, we must catch up on the phone soon, brother. I haven't seen you for too long, and I'd like to find out how your trip went around the world. Sorry about that. I just had to fit that in. Take care, everybody. Have a great night. Hey, Dom.